The room smelled like cigarettes and something floral trying to cover it up. A plug-in air freshener on the wall near the bathroom, the kind that pulses every few minutes. I noticed it because I couldn't sleep, and I lay there counting the pulses like a clock. My daughter had dropped me off at 6 in the evening. "It's just for 2 nights, Mom," she'd said, carrying my overnight bag up the steps herself, which she almost never did. "The Fumigators need the whole house. You can't breathe that stuff at your age." She'd kissed my cheek. My son-in-law had waited in the car with the engine running. I remember thinking she smelled like her old perfume, the one she wore in college, and feeling a small wave of tenderness for her. I remember that clearly. That tenderness. I held on to it the whole walk from the parking lot to room 114. When I woke up the next morning, her number went to voicemail. I told myself she was at work. She had a long commute on Tuesdays. I went down to the vending machine at the end of the hall and got a coffee, the kind in a paper cup that tastes mostly like hot water, and I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the morning news. I waited. By noon, she still hadn't called back. I tried my son-in-law. 1 ring, then voicemail. Not even a full ring. There's a particular feeling, I don't know if everyone knows it, when you realize something is wrong but your mind refuses to finish the thought. It stays at the edge. You look at your phone. You look at the window. You drink the rest of your terrible coffee. Your mind offers you explanations. She's in a meeting, he's driving, they're both just busy. And you accept those explanations because the other thought, the one waiting just behind them, is too large to look at directly. I had $63 in my wallet. I remembered that suddenly, counted it in my head. I hadn't taken out more because the trip was supposed to be 2 nights. My daughter had said she'd bring me home Thursday morning, that she'd take the day off and we'd stop for breakfast on the way. She'd mentioned a diner near the highway she'd been wanting to try. I called her again at 1 o'clock. Voicemail. At 2, I walked to the front desk and asked the young man there if he could tell me how long the reservation was for. He typed something, looked at his screen, looked back at me. "It was a 1-night reservation, ma'am," he said. "Checked out was this morning. I can extend it if you'd like." I stood at that desk for what felt like a long time. The lobby had a plastic fern in the corner, and a television mounted high on the wall playing a game show. A man at a table near the window was eating chips from a bag. "Yes," I said. "Please extend it." He charged me for 1 more night. $47. I handed him my credit card and prayed it would go through. It did. I went back to room 114 and sat down on the bed and let myself finish the thought I hadn't been able to finish all morning. My name is Josephine. I'm 68 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 31 years at the same elementary school in Dayton, Ohio. I retired 6 years ago. My husband, Frank, died 4 years before that, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March. Just like that. No warning. We had 1 daughter. Her name is Melissa. She married a man named Scott 11 years ago, and I genuinely had tried to love him the way you love someone your child chose. My house on Elmwood Drive was paid off. Frank and I had made the last mortgage payment together, opened a bottle of champagne in the kitchen, just the 2 of us. After he died, I stayed in that house because it was full of him. His tools still in the garage. His coffee mug on the 2nd shelf, the blue one with the chip on the rim that I kept meaning to throw away and never did. 2 months before the motel, Melissa had started talking about my situation. That was the word she used, always with a slight lowering of her voice, as if my situation were something embarrassing. She said the house was too big for one person. She said I was too far from them. They'd moved to Columbus 3 years ago. She said I should think about the future. I told her I was thinking about the future just fine. She brought Scott to dinner one Sunday and he talked about equity and market timing and how houses like mine and neighborhoods like Elmwood were selling fast. He had a habit of clicking his pen while he talked. I watched him click it and thought about Frank, who never would have talked to me that way, and I kept my face very still. I was not a woman who made decisions out of fear. That was something Frank used to say about me, and it was true. But I let them take me to lunch the following Saturday, and I let them talk. And somewhere between the salad and the entree, I had signed something. I told myself it was just preliminary paperwork. I told myself I was being open-minded. I did not read it carefully enough. Now I sat in room 114 of a Comfort Inn off I-70 with $63 minus 47, which is 16. And I picked up the motel phone and I called the operator and asked to be connected to my bank. The account had been frozen, not closed. Frozen. There's a difference. A frozen account means someone has made a legal claim against it. The woman on the phone was kind and careful, and she said she couldn't give me details over the phone, that I would need to come into a branch. I said I understood. I hung up. I put my hands flat on my knees and I breathed. I thought about my neighbor, a woman named Dorothy. No relation to any story. Just a 71-year-old woman who grew tomatoes and watched my house when I traveled. I thought about my attorney, a man named Gerald, who'd handled Frank's estate and who I trusted because he had a photograph of his own mother on his desk and eyes that didn't slide away from yours when he talked. I couldn't call either of them because my cell phone battery was at 4% and I had left my charger at the house, and I was not going to waste those 4% on anything that wasn't essential. I walked to the front desk again. The same young man. I asked if I could use the desk phone to make a local call. He said yes, pushed it across the counter to me. I called Dorothy. She answered on the second ring. I told her where I was and I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She said, "I'm coming to get you," and hung up. While I waited, I went back to my room and I wrote down, on the notepad by the phone, everything I could remember, the document I'd signed at lunch, the name of the title company Scott had mentioned once in conversation, the date Melissa had first brought up selling the house. I wrote down the name of every financial account I could remember having, my checking, my savings, Frank's pension that still paid out monthly, my teacher's retirement fund. I wrote small to fit it all on the notepad page. A list. It focused me. The panic was still there, but underneath it, something older and more reliable was waking up. I had spent 31 years managing 23 8-year-olds at a time. I was not incapable. Dorothy arrived in 40 minutes. She stood at the door of room 114 in her gardening jacket, which she clearly hadn't bothered to take off. And when she saw my face, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Okay, we're going to figure this out." She drove me to the Fifth Third branch on Salem Avenue. I walked in and asked to speak with the branch manager, and when the branch manager came out, a woman about 40 with a serious face and sensible shoes, I told her my account had been frozen and I needed to understand why. She took me into her office. She closed the door. It took her 12 minutes to piece together what had happened, and she kept her face professional, but I could see the discomfort. My account had been frozen pursuant to a civil filing. The filing listed a dispute over the transfer of property, my house. The transfer had gone through 4 days ago. Someone had used the power of attorney I had apparently granted to complete the sale while I was somewhere. Not present. Not looking. I had not known I'd granted power of attorney. I sat in that chair across from the bank manager, and I understood, fully and finally, what the document at lunch had been. The manager said she was very sorry. She said she could unfreeze a small emergency amount pending review, $300, given the circumstances. She said I should contact an attorney immediately. She said she was going to flag the account for fraud review. I said, "Thank you." My voice was steady. I was surprised by that. Dorothy drove me to Gerald's office without being asked. I don't know if I told her or if she just knew. His assistant said he was with a client. I said I would wait. I sat in the waiting room for an hour and 20 minutes, and I did not look at my phone and I did not cry. When Gerald came out and saw me, he said, "Josephine, what happened?" I told him all of it in order. The lunch, the document, the motel, the frozen account, the house on Elmwood. He took notes. He asked specific questions. He asked to see the notepad from the motel, which I'd kept in my purse, and he photographed it with his phone. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "This is elder financial abuse. It's a felony in Ohio." The word felony sat between us. "Scott," I said. Gerald nodded slowly. "Most likely both of them. The power of attorney, if it was obtained through deception, is fraudulent. The property transfer would be voidable, but we need to move fast because the house is the asset." We filed an emergency injunction that afternoon. Gerald worked fast, the way he'd worked during Frank's estate when there'd been complications with the life insurance, and I sat in a chair in his office and drank bad coffee and answered every question he asked me. By 5 o'clock, a judge had signed a temporary restraining order blocking any further transfer or encumbrance of the property on Elmwood Drive. The sale had gone through, but the buyer, an LLC I didn't recognize, had not yet recorded the deed. That gap, Gerald told me, was everything. Dorothy took me home with her that night. She made soup. I slept in her guest room, which smelled like cedar and had a quilt on the bed that was heavier than mine, and I slept under it with my arms at my sides, and I thought, just before I fell asleep, about Frank's coffee mug on the second shelf. Still there. Still mine. The next weeks were not easy. I won't tell you they were. Gerald filed suit. The investigating detective, a quiet woman named, of all things, Detective Fuller, interviewed me for 3 hours. I went to the county recorder's office myself on a Thursday, took the bus because Dorothy had a doctor's appointment, and stood at the counter and requested a copy of every document recorded against my property in the last 6 months. The woman behind the counter saw my face and printed them without asking any questions. The documents were bad, systematic. Scott had clearly been planning this for some time. He'd obtained the power of attorney language in the document I signed at lunch, buried in the 3rd paragraph, which I had not read carefully because I had trusted my daughter. Because she was my daughter. Because the salad had been arriving and she had been smiling at me and I had been, stupidly, happy to have her attention. Melissa called me 3 weeks after the motel. I didn't answer. She called again. I didn't answer that time either. The 3rd time I picked up, she said, "Mom, this got out of hand." I said, "Yes, it did." She said Scott had told her it would all work out, that I would be better off, that the money from the sale would set me up somewhere nice. She said she hadn't known about the motel part, that leaving me there had been Scott's idea, and she'd thought he was going to call me the next morning to explain. I listened to all of that. "You signed the paperwork too," I said. "Your name is on the power of attorney." Silence. "I know," she said, very small. I hung up. I did not slam the phone down. I simply ended the call and stood at Dorothy's kitchen window for a moment, looking at her tomato plants. The small green fruit still hard and unripe, and I felt something large and heavy shift inside my chest. Not gone. Just settled into its real shape. Gerald was methodical. The civil case moved forward. The criminal referral moved forward. Scott hired a defense attorney. Melissa hired her own attorney, separate from his, which Gerald said was telling. They were already separating their legal exposure. The property transfer was voided by court order 6 weeks after I had sat in that motel room counting air freshener pulses. I walked back into my house on a Wednesday afternoon with Gerald and a locksmith and Dorothy, who had brought me a coffee from the drive-thru because she knew I'd need something to hold. The house looked the same. Mostly, someone had moved things. I noticed it right away. A lamp in the wrong place, my chair at a different angle. Small things. but Frank's blue mug was still on the second shelf. I checked that first. Before anything else, the criminal case took longer. It always does. Fraud and elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, these things move through a system that is slow by design. I did not attend the sentencing. My attorney offered to escort me. Dorothy offered to come with me. I told them both I didn't need to be there. Some people thought I should want to see it, that witnessing it would give me something. Closure, maybe, or satisfaction. But I had already gotten what I needed. I got it the morning I walked back into my house. I got it the evening I sat at my own kitchen table and drank coffee from Frank's blue mug, the one with the chip on the rim. I got it in small pieces over all those weeks. Every bus ride to an office, every form I signed, every question I answered, clearly and without flinching. Scott received 4 years. Melissa received a suspended sentence, 3 years probation, and a requirement to complete 200 hours of community service. Gerald called me with the details. I wrote them down on a notepad, not the motel one, a fresh one, and then I set the pen down and went out to water my garden. People ask me sometimes, usually when they hear the broad strokes of the story, how I got through it. They expect something large. Resilience, faith, fury. I tell them it was mostly just practicality. You figure out what the next step is and you take it. You write things down. You call the people you trust. You don't let the size of the problem convince you there's nothing to be done, because there is almost always something to be done, and doing it is the only way through. I also tell them this: don't sign anything at a restaurant. I'm 68 years old. I taught children how to read for 31 years. I know who I am. That has never once been the part that was in question. I still think about that notepad from the motel. The one I wrote on with the cheap pen they leave bolted to the desk. My handwriting was smaller than usual, because I was trying to fit everything on one page. Every account number I could remember, every name, every date. At the time, I didn't know if any of it would matter. I just knew that writing it down was the only thing I could think to do, and so I did it. That's what I want to say first. Before anything else, the list saved me more than anything. Not because it had magic information, but because making it meant I hadn't given up. It meant some part of me underneath the fear was still thinking clearly, still choosing to act instead of collapse. That part of me, the part that reaches for a pen when the world falls apart, that's the part I want to talk about. People have a tendency, when they hear what Melissa and Scott did, to focus on the wrong thing. They get angry at them, which is understandable. They call it evil, which is maybe fair. But I've spent enough time with this now to know that the more useful question isn't what they did. It's what I did after, because here is what I believe. After 68 years of living, the choices we make in the worst moments are the ones that reveal who we actually are. Not the good moments, not the easy ones, the motel room, the dead phone, the $63. What do you do when all the structures you relied on are suddenly gone? That's the real question. That's always the real question. I took the bus to the records office. I walked into the bank and asked to speak to a manager. I sat in Gerald's waiting room for an hour and 20 minutes, and I did not leave. Those weren't dramatic decisions. They didn't feel brave in the moment. They felt like the only reasonable next steps, taken one at a time, because the alternative was to sit still and let it all happen to me. And I have never been that woman. What Scott counted on, what I think people who do what he did always count on, is that the person they're taking from will be too frightened, too ashamed, or too worn down to push back. He expected me to be confused and helpless, and grateful for whatever scraps he'd left me. He did not expect me to show up at a bank branch in the same clothes I'd slept in and ask the right questions in the right order. Integrity is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the thing that makes you write the list when you're scared, and take the bus when you're humiliated, and wait in the chair when every part of you wants to go home, even when home has been taken from you. I am not angry at my daughter the way I expected to be. I was for a while, but what I feel now is closer to grief. She had a mother who loved her without conditions, and she traded that for a man who turned out to be exactly what I'd seen in his eyes across that dinner table. Someone who clicks his pen and talks about equity and sees other people as problems to be managed. That's a loss she'll carry for a long time. The court gave her probation. Life will give her the rest. As for me, I went home. I made coffee in Frank's blue mug. I went out and watered my garden. That's the whole lesson, if there is one. Know what you're worth. Know who you are. And when someone tries to take that from you, don't ask permission to fight back. Just pick up the pen and start writing.